Bride left by Millionaire, and years later, he sees her with quadruplets and takes her to court. Hello, welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and activate notifications. Samantha Blake stood before the full-length mirror, her wedding gown shimmering in the soft amber glow of the suite. She adjusted the lace veil for what felt like the 100th time, each movement more tentative than the last. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. 30 a.m. The ceremony was set to begin in 30 minutes. Her heart raced with excitement, nerves, and love. Today was the day she would become Mrs. Jonathan Carter, the wife of the wealthiest man in Boston. It was supposed to be perfect, but then the phone rang. Samantha's heart skipped a beat as she turned to pick it up, a smile still playing on her lips. Hello? Her voice was soft, trembling slightly. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence.
Samantha.
Jonathan's voice was cold, distant. I'm not coming. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She felt the air leave her lungs, her heart squeezing painfully in her chest. What? She whispered, the single word drenched in disbelief. It's over. I can't go through with it. I need to focus on the company right now. You'll understand someday. With that, the line went dead. The phone slipped from her fingers, crashing onto the floor as she stared blankly at her reflection. A bride without a groom, a love story without a happy ending. As the minutes ticked by, Samantha realized this wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the beginning of a battle she never saw coming. Samantha's world shattered that day, leaving her lost in a haze of grief and disbelief. The lavish hotel room, once a testament to Jonathan's wealth and status, felt cold and empty as she stood alone, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been the happiest day of her life. As her vision blurred with unshed tears, she yanked off her veil and flung it aside, the delicate lace crumpling on the floor, a symbol of all the promises Jonathan had just broken. In the following days, news of the wedding cancellations spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed of Jonathan Carter's last-minute decision, painting Samantha as the abandoned fiancée left to pick up the pieces. Paparazzi hounded her, flashing cameras capturing every moment of her heartbreak as she left the penthouse they once shared. But Samantha refused to crumble. With no job, no connections, and nowhere to go, she packed up her things and disappeared from the high society world she'd once been part of. She rented a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was a stark contrast to the luxury she was used to, but it was hers, free from Jonathan's shadow. One morning, about a month after the disastrous non-wedding, she sat in her tiny bathroom, staring down at a small plastic stick. Her hands trembled as she watched a second line slowly appear. Pregnant. Her heart dropped, and then the shock turned to something else. Panic, confusion, hope. She couldn't call Jonathan. She wouldn't, after what he'd done, after how easily he had walked away without a backward glance. There was no way she'd let him back into her life. He didn't deserve to know. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Samantha's small frame swelled with life. For lives, as it turned out, quadruplets. She could hardly believe it when the doctor told her, his voice tinged with awe. How am I going to do this? She whispered, cradling her belly as she sat in the darkened room of her tiny apartment one night. But she did. Samantha didn't just survive. She thrived for them. She worked 2 jobs, piecing together a life for herself and her children, Jack, James, Jake, and Jesse, for tiny miracles that filled her world with love and laughter. As the quadruplets grew, so did Samantha's resolve. Every milestone, every first word, every giggle, every step strengthened her belief that she'd made the right choice. Jonathan would never be part of their lives.
He didn't deserve to be.
The boys had Jonathan's piercing blue eyes and his sandy blonde hair. Strangers would stop her on the street and comment on how identical they looked, how striking their resemblance was. And every time, Samantha's heart would ache just a little. It was as if Jonathan was there, in every smile, every mischievous glance. By the time the boys turned 3, Samantha had settled into a routine. She worked at a small marketing firm during the day, and in the evenings, she freelanced as a graphic designer, squeezing in the work after the boys went to bed. Money was tight, but she made it work. There was no other choice. But everything changed one sunny afternoon when Samantha took the boys to the park. They were playing on the swings, their laughter ringing through the air, when Samantha felt a prickle of awareness at the back of her neck. She turned, her breath catching in her throat, standing just a few feet away. Watching her boys with an expression she couldn't quite read was Jonathan. The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. He looked different, older, sharper. His suit was immaculate, his hair neatly combed back, but there was something in his eyes, something vulnerable and raw. "Samantha," he murmured, taking a hesitant step forward. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. She instinctively moved in front of the quadruplets, shielding them with her body. Jonathan's gaze shifted to the four boys, his face paling. "Are they?" He couldn't finish the question, but Samantha saw the moment the realization hit him. His mouth dropped open slightly, and for a second, he looked like a man completely lost. "They're not yours," Samantha lied, the words spilling out before she could stop them. But Jonathan wasn't fooled. She could see it in his eyes, the way they darted between her and the boys, taking in every detail, every familiar trait. He took another step closer, his hands clenched at his sides. "Samantha, I need to know," he pleaded, his voice low and urgent. "Are they mine?" She lifted her chin, fighting to keep her expression blank. "It doesn't matter, Jonathan. You made your choice years ago. We don't need you." And then she turned, calling out to the boys in a bright, shaky voice. "Come on, guys. It's time to go home." They ran to her, their little hands reaching up to grab hers. Jonathan stood frozen, his gaze following them as they walked away. And as Samantha glanced back over her shoulder, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Determination. He wasn't going to let them go. 2 weeks later, Jonathan showed up again. This time, he wasn't alone, he brought a lawyer. Samantha's heart sank as she read the papers he thrust into her hands. "Custody? You can't be serious," she whispered, staring up at him in disbelief. "I am," he replied quietly. "Samantha, I made a mistake. I know that now. But those boys, they deserve to know who their father is. I deserve a chance to be part of their lives." Her hands shook as she crumpled the papers. "You don't get to walk back into my life after everything you've done, after abandoning us." "I never knew," he shot back, his voice breaking. "I never knew about them, Samantha, because you never gave me a chance to tell you," she shouted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "You left, Jonathan. You left me with nothing. No money, no home, and 4 babies to raise alone." He flinched, but his expression hardened. "I'm not leaving again." The next few months were a blur of courtrooms and lawyers. Jonathan, true to his word, refused to back down. He showed up to every hearing, every meeting, fighting to prove he was serious about being in the boys' lives. And slowly, agonizingly, Samantha began to believe him. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. And as the tension between them simmered, Samantha couldn't help but wonder, was he really here for the boys? Or was this just another one of his power plays? One evening, just as Samantha started to let her guard down, a tall, elegant woman stepped out of Jonathan's car, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Samantha's blood ran cold as she recognized her. Vivian, Jonathan's fiancée. But why was she here, smiling down at Samantha's children as if they were part of her perfect future? "Hello, Samantha," Vivian purred. "I hear we have some things to discuss." Samantha's heart pounded as Vivian's cool smile settled on her. She looked as flawless as ever. Dressed in a designer coat, her hair immaculately styled, and that same aura of confidence radiating off her. It felt like stepping into a nightmare. Once she had thought she'd escaped when Jonathan left her standing alone in that hotel room all those years ago. "What are you doing here?" Samantha asked, keeping her voice low so the boys, who were playing a few feet away, wouldn't hear. Vivian tilted her head, looking amused. "Isn't it obvious?" She glanced at Jonathan, her expression softening as she linked her arm with his. "We're going to be a family, Samantha." Samantha's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" "We're getting married," Vivian said, as if the words were perfectly reasonable, as if they didn't rip Samantha apart. And Jonathan, and I want to make sure that these little ones are part of our lives. The implication hung heavy in the air. Our lives, our family, they're not yours, Samantha shot back, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage.
You have no right to.
Actually, we do, Vivian interrupted, her voice silky smooth. Jonathan is their father, and as his wife, I'll be well. I guess you could call me their stepmother. Samantha felt her world tilting. How could this be happening? She had thought that Jonathan's reappearance would be her biggest challenge, but now Vivian was here, twisting the knife deeper. You're not their mother, Samantha spat, struggling to keep her composure. You will never be their mother, Vivian's smile widened. No, I suppose not. But I'll be in their lives, whether you like it or not. Jonathan, who had remained silent until now, took a step forward, his gaze fixed on Samantha. We want to make this work, Samantha. For the boys. For the boys. The audacity of his words sent a rush of anger through her. She had spent the last 3 years struggling, scraping by to give her children the best life she could. And now Jonathan was trying to waltz back in with his fiancée, acting like he could just take over. You can't just come back and decide to play house with my sons, she hissed, her eyes blazing. Our sons, Jonathan corrected softly. And I'm not going anywhere. Samantha stared at him, hating the way her heart tightened at the look in his eyes. The same look he used to give her when they were younger, when he made promises that she had foolishly believed. Please, Samantha, he murmured.
Let's talk about this.
I want to be in their lives. She took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. You can be in their lives, she said, her voice low but firm. But on my terms, not hers. Vivian's smile faltered, a flash of anger darkening her eyes. That's not for you to decide. Samantha's gaze never left Jonathan's. Yes, it is, because I'm the one who's been here. I'm the one who's raised them. I'm the one they call mommy when they're sick or scared. Vivian opened her mouth to retort, but Jonathan put a hand on her arm, silencing her. He looked back at Samantha, his expression conflicted. I just want a chance, he whispered. Please. Samantha swallowed hard, the anger warring with something softer, something painful. She didn't trust him. Not yet. But the boys deserved to know their father. And deep down, a part of her, a small, fragile part, wanted to believe that he had changed. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice tight. But you don't get to make demands. Not after what you did. Jonathan nodded slowly, relief washing over his face. Thank you. Vivian, however, looked furious. You can't be serious, Jonathan. She's trying to control everything. That's enough, Vivian, he said sharply, his eyes flashing. This is between Samantha and me. Samantha watched as Vivian's face twisted with anger, but she turned on her heel, striding back toward the car without another word. Jonathan lingered for a moment, his gaze still on Samantha. I meant what I said, he murmured. I want to do right by them. And then he turned, following Vivian, leaving Samantha standing alone once again. Samantha couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Vivian's face, smirking, victorious as if she had already won. She knew what this was. It wasn't just about the boys. It was about control, power. Vivian wanted to put Samantha in her place, to remind her of who Jonathan really belonged to, but Samantha wouldn't let her. The next morning, she called her lawyer. They had a long, tense conversation, going over every option, every possibility. By the time they hung up, Samantha was exhausted, but her resolve had hardened. She would fight for her boys, whatever it took. The first custody hearing was set for 2 weeks later. Samantha arrived at the courthouse early, her heart pounding. Jonathan was already there, looking tense but determined. And beside him, like a shadow, was Vivian. The hearing was brutal. Vivian's lawyer painted Samantha as an unfit mother, bringing up every struggle she'd faced, every mistake she'd made. They talked about her low income, her tiny apartment, the fact that she had no family support. It's clear that Ms. Blake is not providing these children with the life they deserve. The lawyer drawled, his tone dripping with disdain. Mr. Carter, on the other hand, can offer them stability, security, and a loving home. Samantha clenched her fists under the table.
How dare they?
How dare they judge her for doing her best, for making sacrifices Jonathan had never even considered. But then her lawyer stood up, his voice calm and steady.
Miss
Blake has raised these boys on her own for the last 3 years. She has been their sole caregiver, their source of love and comfort. And despite her circumstances, she has never once asked Mr. Carter for help. She has provided for them to the best of her ability. And they are happy, healthy, and deeply loved. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the table. Samantha's heart ached as she watched him, torn between wanting him to understand and wanting him to hurt as much as she had. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, listened to both sides before leaning forward, her gaze piercing.
Miss
Blake, she said, her tone measured, I'm inclined to believe that you are a good mother. He looked different, not like the cold, distant man who had left her, but like the Jonathan she used to know.